Well, welcome to our Applied Fitness Solutions monthly webinar. This month's topic is moving your mental health. My name is Mike Stack. I am the founder and CEO of Applied Fitness Solutions. I'm an exercise physiologist by trade and training. I'm also a health entrepreneur and a health educator. And this is a topic that I really enjoy talking about for lots of reasons, as we're going to go into in this presentation. But I think, no more important than the kind of general broad acknowledgement in our current society of the mental health crisis that we're facing and what we can all do to improve our mental health. So I think for some of you that are listening to this, this might be further validation of the reason that you move and you exercise. For some of you listening to this, it might be as an adjunct to some type of talk therapy or more conventional mental health treatment. For others of you listening, it just might be a way to spur your motivation to begin exercising. So I think there's a lot of ways to approach this topic, but I think the best way to start approaching it is with this concept of the mental health pill. And I think I alluded to this in some of the lead up to this webinar on social media. If I had a pill that reduce stress by releasing endorphins and controlling your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, improve your mood, boost self-esteem and self-confidence, enhance cognitive function, memory, learning, neuroplasticity, the growth of new nerve tissue, preventing and managing anxiety and depression, improving sleep, improving social connectedness, acting as a healthy coping mechanism, and enhancing resilience. If I had a pill that did all of those things, I think most people would be very excited to take that pill. And in fact, I think this pill might actually outsell the anti-obesity medication pills, or more accurately, shots that are out there right now. And I think you're probably going to see where I'm going with this, but to a great degree, movement and exercise is this pill, and research validates everything that you see here on the slide. Obviously, in a webinar like this, we're not going to get too deep into the neurophysiology of everything that you see up here. But if you wanted to, you could, and we'll touch on a couple of factors during this presentation. But the power of movement is much more than what we first thought it was when we started talking about physical activity and exercise. The power of movement is not just about making your body physically healthier, but it's also about making your mind mentally healthier. And that, I think, is an exciting thing for us all to consider. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on this because I think we're inundated by the popular media talking about the current state of mental health in our country, but I also think we can't dismiss talking about this. 21% of adults are experiencing some form of mental illness right now. 15% of adults report that they have a substance abuse disorder. And again, this is reported data. Can you only imagine the non-reported data? Almost 5% of adults have seriously considered suicide. And I think here is the scarier thought due to the lack of mental health providers that exist in our healthcare system right now. 55% of adults receive no mental health treatment that need that treatment. One mental health provider per 350 people in our country is simply not enough to be able to treat the mental health issues that affect our society nowadays. And so I think we have to look at complementary mechanisms to improve our mental health. And I want to be very clear about the term I use there. This is not alternative mechanisms. If you are suffering from a mental illness, it is very important that you're treated by a qualified mental health provider. Exercise and movement certainly can be a complement to a mental health treatment that is holistic in nature, implemented by a multidisciplinary team, but it is not an alternative to conventional mental health treatments, such as the gold standard of talk therapy or intensive behavioral interventions. So with that said, I think we can go a step further and say, okay, not everyone, fortunately, is dealing with a mental illness. Some people are just kind of languishing. And languishing can be generally defined as dissatisfaction, a lack of engagement or excitement, and a loss of interest. So apathy, listlessness. And I kind of think of it on this dual continuum model. On the horizontal axis here, you see mental illness. On one side, on the far left, you see mental illness symptoms. On the other side, you see no mental illness symptoms. So this horizontal axis I would call the clinical axis. Whereas the vertical axis here, it would call the subclinical axis. And this is the languishing, flourishing aspect, assets. Now, obviously, if we had our desire, we would be in this upper right quadrant all the time, where we would have no mental illness symptoms and we would be flourishing. However, you can have mental illness symptoms and still be flourishing. I think conversely and importantly, you could have no mental illness symptoms and you can be languishing. You can kind of have this general sense of dissatisfaction, lack of engagement, or excitement. And when we look at this on a spectrum, we start to realize that a very small portion of our population is actually in that flourishing part of the mental health spectrum. Now, fortunately, we have a large number of people who have reasonable mental wellness. And then you see we have this languishing and mental disorder or mental illness part of the spectrum on the far left-hand side. Ultimately, we want to move everyone as far towards flourishing as we possibly can. And as I said earlier, exercise and movement is one vehicle to do so. And I'm going to make some arguments as to why it might be the most efficient vehicle to do so. But there are many ways to move from a state of languishing to a state of mental wellness and then to a state of flourishing. And movement and physical activity are one of the levers that we can pull. So let's define flourishing a little more. And there's lots of ways we can define this. The optimal range of human functioning, connoting goodness, generativity, growth, and resilience. That's one definition of it. The father of modern positive psychology, Martin Seligman, suggests that it's fulfillment in our lives, accomplishing meaningful and worthwhile tasks, connected to others at a deeper level. On its most simple form, it's the good life. And I would point all of you to Dr. Seligman's book, Flourish, which is an amazing book that dives so much deeper into this concept of flourishing and what can be done in many different aspects of your life to get to a higher level of flourishing. But we can go back to this mental health pill. Of all the things that a mental health pill could do for us that would be beneficial to our mental health. And as I said, all of these are evidence-based benefits of movement. And time again, we have found in research studies these outcomes replicated. And I got to be honest, you probably don't need a research study to tell you that these are the things that movement and exercise do for you. As I said in one of the lead ups to this webinar, I can't tell you a time where I've gone outside and walked in nature and not felt better afterwards. We know there's some amazing research, particularly in the pre-adolescent and adolescent population, on the role that movement plays in learning and memory. And we're also going to look at some other studies that look at the effect of movement on treating anxiety and depression. So there really is a whole litany of benefits that moving gives you that I think we don't give it credit for. I do want to point out that there's a whole list of benefits that aren't on this list that we've traditionally associated with movement and exercise, such as weight control or improved BMI or improved blood pressure or cholesterol or all the physical health benefits of exercise. Those all exist and they all are true, and they've been touted as the reason to move. And not that they're not the reason to move, but we also have all of these other substantial benefits as well that exist from the neck up instead of all the benefits we've thought of that have existed from the neck down. And we're going to talk about how I think this can reframe your relationship around movement and exercise in a way that's incredibly beneficial. So let's look at some research. Let's look at some studies here. And there's a lot going on in this graph. So I'm going to first draw your attention to the upper left where it says whole sample here. And what you see here is this is mean mental health burden in the past month. That means, days where somebody did not have good mental health. And they found, as you could see here, the group that was doing no exercise in the whole sample, that was about 3.5 days during the month. And the group that did exercise, it was only about 2 days during the month. So they had a reduced mental health burden of 1.5 days per month. Think of what you can do with an extra 1.5 days per month where you had improved mental health. So this is a real finding in research, and that's their whole sample of people that both had clinical mental health disorders and did not have clinical mental health disorders. And then what becomes interesting here is if you look over to the right in their whole sample, so kind of in this forest plot looking graph that you see over here, you see that the reduction in mental health burden compared with no exercise, this right here, this vertical axis is 0. Each of these tick marks are 5%. So you see, even with just household levels of what we wouldn't even call exercise, we would call physical activity, you see a reduction in mental health burden compared to no exercise of somewhere around 12%. And then you get to walking, you're moving up around 17.5%. And then when you start to get the higher intensity exercise, you start to get upwards of 20 to 25% reduction in mental health burden, which essentially for the purposes of what we're talking about here are just poor days of mental health. And then when you go down here and you look at the no exercise versus exercise group in the cohort inside of this larger study that had depression, you see the effect is even more pronounced, close to 11 days of mental health burden for the group that didn't exercise, and then 7 days for the group that did exercise. And you also see pretty consistent improvements in the days with mental health burden given the different kinds of activity. But I really want to point out, household physical activity improved mental health burden by 10%. We're not talking about going to the gym and exercising or going out for an intense run. We're just talking about standard physical activity. So I think this shows the potent role that movement and exercise plays in not only improving mental health in a population that both has mental illness and does not, but also in a population that suffers from mental illness. And then we go a step further here and we look at anxiety disorder. And the different types of anxiety disorders are laid out here, from specific to social to generalized to panic being the most severe of these anxiety disorders. And you see in every single case, the group that regularly exercised that had these type of anxiety disorders significantly reduced as a percentage of the US population. So there is a strong correlation here between the amount of exercise that somebody was doing and the reduction in anxiety. So we've just seen on these last two slides that the two most common mental health disorders that exist in our population, depression and anxiety, are both effectively, and I'm going to use this word very, very carefully and intentionally here, are very effectively treated by exercise. Now, again, it is a complementary therapy to traditional talk therapy, and maybe even in some cases psychopharmacological medications, but it is a viable treatment route. And you're starting to see this more and more. And I'm not going to put up any of the really elaborate clinical studies here, but there have been studies that have compared the effect of the psychopharmaceutical medications, so the SSRIs, medications for schizophrenia and things along those lines, and compared their effect size in research to the effect size of certain exercise interventions. And in many, many cases, exercise has been shown to be as effective, if not more effective, than your traditional pharmaceutical intervention that's a complement to traditional talk therapy. So there really is some strong and mounting evidence. And I do want to point everyone to a resource, because I think it's such an amazing resource for people to understand the role movement plays in mental health. The J.W. Brick Foundation does tremendous research on the role of exercise and physical activity and mental health and well-being. The Brick Foundation is a fascinating story. It was founded by Victor and Lynn Brick. Victor and Lynn Brick are Planet Fitness master franchisees. They own a bunch of Planet Fitness locations. And Victor's brother passed away of suicide from schizophrenia. And so he started this mental health foundation with the goal of figuring out ways to improve mental health and reduce mental illness. And obviously, given his affinity towards exercise with what he did with Planet Fitness, he said, well, what role can exercise play as a vehicle in this? And they have produced what I'd call a non-clinical meta-analysis, like a study of studies that aggregates all of the existing data that they could find on movement and mental health. And the name of the report is the Move Your Mental Health Report. It's from the J.W. Brick Foundation. It's a free report. It's open access on the internet. I highly recommend, if you're interested in this subject, you check it out, because it really is a great comprehensive resource that dives much deeper than what we can dive into today. And excitingly, the Brick Foundation actually developed a mental well-being certification for fitness and exercise professionals that is now available to professionals in the field with a specific emphasis on mental health. So I think that the work of the Brick Foundation and other organizations out there really underscores the paradigm shift that we're starting to see in the role exercise and movement can play in improving mental health. And when we look at movement in the brain, again, I can give the physiology lesson on this all day long, but I think on a high level, it's just important to know that there are many different mechanistic ways that exercise influences our brain. And the one thing that I really want to hit on here, because I think it's such a cool and fascinating area of research, is an area of research that looks at something called the neurotrophins, specifically a neurotrophin called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Now, as complicated as that might sound, I'll put it in very simple terms. BDNF is basically Miracle-Gro for the brain. It is associated with growth of new nerve tissue, growth of gray matter in our brain. And we know exercise is one of the most potent stimuli for improving the secretion of BDNF. Other things do it. Meditation does it. There's certainly other mechanisms through which you can do it through. But literally, the neurotrophins are a class of essentially growth factors for our nerve tissue. And exercise is something that spurs the growth or spurs the increase of these neurotrophins, particularly BDNF. So this is why we associate exercise and movement with reductions in cognitive decline, improvements in Alzheimer's and dementia. It really is an all-encapsulating mental health pill that mechanistically addresses several critical factors to brain function and wellness just by its performance. And that's the exciting thing about this. It allows us to start to shift our paradigm. And I think this starts to shift our myopic view of exercise that needs to change, it has to change, and it can change. I think that commercialization has convinced us that exercise is about the way we look. If you've heard me talk before, I've said that many times before. Science reminds us that the way we look is just a side effect of exercise. It's not a direct effect. Science tells us exercise is about how we feel, how we function, and how we perform. And I think traditionally, we've thought of feel, function, and performance to be relegated kind of myopically to physical health. What I'm talking about in this presentation, and what a lot of the emerging conversation around movement is turning towards, is how we feel mentally and emotionally, how we function mentally and emotionally, and how we perform mentally and emotionally. I mean, think about it. Every single day, for those of us that are adults that are listening to this webinar right now, which I'd venture to say the majority of the audience probably is, it's not about our physical performance on a day-by-day basis anymore. Like I'm not playing sports. I'm not competing as an athlete. It's my mental performance on a day-by-day basis. You know, I am a knowledge worker. Many of you are knowledge workers. And we know that movement and exercise is a way to improve your brain's functional capacity. And I think that's how we have to look at it. So we can start to change our paradigm from I must exercise to look a certain way according to societal standards, to I can now exercise to feel better, to be healthy, to live the life I want to live and do all the things I want to do. And yes, physical health is critically important to that. But the yin to that yang, the other side of that coin that has to be there is mental health. We know that when someone's mental health suffers, their physical health suffers. When somebody's physical health suffers, their mental health suffers. The exciting thing about movement and exercise is it addresses both your physical health and it addresses your mental health. And the research is just emerging on a daily basis because of our understanding of the neurophysiology and the neurobiology of the brain, as well as just what exercise does to it, how potent movement is for the improvement of our overall mental well-being and cognitive function. And the cool thing about this, and this is where I hope the real reframe happens for those of you that are listening to this webinar. When you start to talk about moving to feel better, exercising to feel better, you start to work with, not against, your evolutionary biology. And follow me on this. I'm not going to take us too far down the evolutionary biology path, but I think it's important to understand kind of the evolutionary underpinnings of what we focus on when we do exercise. Our evolutionary biology, so that is, our biology that has allowed us to, as human beings, to survive this long on the planet, are all these mechanisms that work in the background of our life that have allowed us to get to the point we're at, where other species have died out over time. And our evolutionary biology always favors instant gratification. It does this because back in prehistoric times, where the maintenance of our species was certainly in doubt at that point, we needed to find things that gave us energy, that allowed us to procreate, all the things that we can derive instant gratification from. Our brain favored by the release of something like dopamine. Like, when you ate the honey, you got the dopamine hit, you felt better. When you procreated, you felt better. All the things that our body needed to survive back in prehistoric times, all those physiological mechanisms still exist. So we favor instant gratification always. This is why we like the likes on social media. This is why we like the easy button. This is why we like to be able to get something in 3 hours from Amazon. Instant gratification gives our brains that little hit of dopamine every time we receive instant gratification. The challenging part about the physical health benefits of exercise is they are distal to the performance of exercise. They're happening weeks to months to years later. So let's use the most extreme example. If you are exercising to live longer, you're not going to derive that benefit until decades later in many cases. So we've completely wiped out the role instant gratification can play in our motivation to do that exercise. Even if you're looking to lose weight, which is obviously a much more shorter term goal, weight loss doesn't occur immediately upon doing exercise. Maybe you're going to step on the scale at the end of the week and you're going to lose a pound or two or something like that. But even that's pretty far away. And then there's a bunch of health reasons to exercise that fall somewhere in between, days away to years or decades away. And that's like improving your blood pressure and your cholesterol and your back pain and getting stronger and all those things, which are great reasons to exercise. I'm not saying they're not. The problem is we do not derive instant gratification from those things. We do from watching Netflix. We do from having a container of Haagen-Dazs or eating a Jets pizza. We do from taking a nap on the couch. Those are instantly gratifying things. And the problem is with the way our evolutionary biology favors instant gratification, if we've got these simple things in our life that could instantly gratify us, and exercise is something that's going to provide delayed gratification weeks, months, years, decades later, then we're always going to be drawn towards those things that require or that provide us with instant gratification. But the mental health benefits of exercise are immediate. They're immediate. So if you reframe the outcome of exercise to the immediate mental health benefits, this psychologically reinforces that behavior. Exercise no longer becomes just about losing weight or getting healthier or living longer. If it also, and maybe primarily, becomes about feeling better, functioning better at a cognitive level, reduced stress, reduced anxiety, reduced depression, all the things that we saw on that mental health pill slide a while back, if we tie our reason for moving and exercising to those mental health benefits, those happen immediately. That releases dopamine that reinforces the behavior. So now all of a sudden, we've gone from a delayed gratification outcome of improving our physical health to an immediate mental health outcome of improving our mental health. And that all of a sudden starts to get our motivations in line with evolutionary biology. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should completely not think of or discount the physical health benefits of exercise, because they're very real. But what I am saying is, if that's the only thing you focus on, there's a good chance that all the other instantly gratifying behaviors that exist in our world will get in your way before you've performed enough movement or exercise to actually achieve some of those physical health benefits. So if we flip it on its head and we say, I'm exercising for the immediate mental health benefits of exercise, then you're going to do it consistently enough to get those physical health benefits. So this is much more of a reframe than it really is anything else. But it really does work. So I know this is a little bit of an abstract conversation, but I think it's so important. People who exercise because they like how they feel when they're doing it or after they do it are much more likely to stick with it than people that are only concerned about what they get out of it. I've had over a 20-year career helping people try to maintain consistent exercise and physical activity behaviors. And I can tell you to a person, the people that are myopically focused on that outcome, and that's the only thing they think of, and it's in the distant future, I would say 9 times out of 10, maybe even more often than that, that person failed to be consistent long enough to achieve those physical health outcomes. Whereas the people that did it because they liked the process or they liked how they felt immediately after they completed the process, those were the people that were adherent and compliant long enough to achieve those physical health outcomes. So when I talk, I use some terms interchangeably, and I think it's important that we define some terms. And if you've heard me talk before, I've defined these terms before for you, but I think it's important for it to be reinforced. And so there's kind of a hierarchy of movement that I like to think of. First is reducing sedentary time, then is increasing physical activity next, and then finally the tip top of the pyramid is exercise, right? And as I always say, it might seem to be unique or odd that an exercise physiologist by training would say that exercise is the most important form of movement you can do, but it is the least important form of movement you can do. It's still an important form, but it's not as important as kind of the combination of reducing sedentary time, which happens when you increase physical activity. So to clarify my definitions here, physical activity is any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscle that requires energy expenditure. It's limitless, non-specific, and it can be done at varied intensities. So you go back several slides back when we talked about the reduction in mental health burden from different types of physical activity and movement and exercise. The household chores, that's what physical activity falls under. Now, exercise is a type of physical activity. It's planned, it's structured, it's repetitive bodily movements, and it's done to improve physical fitness. It's typically done in a moderate to high intensity, and it's typically done to improve one or more aspects of fitness. So we've just kind of contrasted physical activity and exercise. Again, physical activity being the category, exercise being a subset of that category. And then we have to define health and fitness. Health is a state of kind of overall well-being. And note here, it's physical, mental, and social. It's not just not being diseased. Physical fitness is the ability to carry out daily tasks with vigor, alertness, without a lot of fatigue, with energy to do the things you want to do physically. So I think it's really important to understand that when we're having this conversation around moving to just improve your overall mental well-being, physical activity in many cases will suffice to improve your overall mental well-being. Now, it might not help as a complementary treatment for mental illness. It also might not help as a way to get us from kind of a normal state of mental well-being to flourishing, or from languishing to flourishing. But just moving during your day is a great way to improve your overall mental health. And we'll talk about some recommendations for that as we move towards the end of the presentation. Now, I'm kind of obligated to put these next couple slides up here because I think it's also important to just acknowledge all the other amazing benefits that movement gives us. So here's the great thing about moving is that when you do it, it improves both your physical health and it improves your mental health. It's not just one or the other, it's always both. And this study conducted by Stephen Blair that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1996 found that low aerobic fitness was a bigger predictor of early mortality than was cigarette smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and BMI. You know, we've had this conversation around these webinars previously and around some blog articles I've written, and certainly just in the popular press about the role of obesity in a state of ill health and how these anti-obesity medications are great for driving down BMI, which as a result of that reduces morbidity and mortality. Well, if you look at this and you see here, somebody who has low aerobic fitness and is a woman has a 2.23 times greater likelihood of all-cause mortality compared to baseline, whereas a woman who has a BMI of above 27 only has a 1.18 increased risk of mortality. So, I mean, that's almost double in that particular case. So we really see that moving not only improves your mental health, but it also improves your physical health. And then, you know, probably one of my favorite slides to show, and again, if you've heard me talk before, you've seen this slide, another study published by Stephen Blair in JAMA in 1989 here. Again, 1989, so this is not something we just learned yesterday, folks, shows that in both men and women, when you go from the lowest level of aerobic fitness to the second lowest level of aerobic fitness, you cut your mortality rate in half or greater. That is astounding. That is like going from very, 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 very out of shape to just very, very, very out of shape. I took out one very and I cut mortality rate in more than half. That's phenomenal. And essentially what this shows is a concept that I call flattening the curve. And again, as I've said many times before, I said this before Anthony Fauci did. So I came up with this and he stole it from me. You don't have to go from being a couch potato to a jack potato to significantly improve your health. You just have to go from being a slightly more active potato. It's the slope of the line right there that I think is the most powerful public health message that exists around movement. And illness or disease could be physical illness or disease. It could be mental illness or disease. Whatever it is, we know that if you go from doing something or very little to, I'm sorry, nothing or very little to something or a little bit more, you will see significant improvements in your health and significant reductions in your illness. So I think that's the exciting part about this. And that's why it is so accessible for people. And I'm going to stay on this point for a second here because I think this is a critical take-home message, particularly for people who are struggling with mental illness in light of the fact that it is very challenging to get in with mental health providers. Again, the mental health provider shortage is significant. It's been exacerbated since COVID. I have friends that work in that field that will tell you they have waiting lists a mile long, and it doesn't seem to be abating anytime soon. While I think it is incredibly important and urgently important that we address the shortage of mental health providers that exist right now in our healthcare system in this country, there's no immediate solution to that. However, we know based upon the data that you've seen in this presentation that engaging in physical activity and exercise can be a great complement to traditional mental health treatment. And if somebody can't undergo that treatment at the volume or intensity it needs to happen, those traditional mental health type of interventions, then movement and exercise is an amazing place to start because it will start to improve mental health. So let's talk about some general recommendations, and then I'll drill down a little bit more into recommendations for depression and anxiety. Let's first talk about physical activity and reducing sedentary time. I think the highest mileage place for anyone who's listening to start that's looking to improve their mental health and well-being through movement is to not sit for more than 60 to 90 minutes at a time without moving for 3 to 5 minutes. So these are just movement breaks or movement snacks during your day. Even better if you could take these movement breaks or movement snacks outside. Now, I fully realize, depending on how cold or how hot it is outside, that may not be reasonable. But the fact of the matter is, if you get up and move every 60 to 90 minutes for 3 to 5 minutes, you will feel better. You also improve a whole bunch of other stuff, including your cardiometabolic health and your glucose tolerance and things that are beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. And I know what you might be saying to me, like, oh, Mike, I'm working. I like to sit at my desk. I like to focus. I like to work. I don't want to get up every 60 to 90 minutes. It'll break my concentration. It'll break my focus. I'll be less productive. Well, that's directly counter to the research that suggests that a little bit of movement can help to improve your cognitive function, your focus, your mental recall, your retention, and your overall mood. So if anything, the research would suggest that the more you move, within kind of the subset of this 3 to 5 minutes for every 60 to 90 minutes that you're sitting, the more productive you will be with that time, not less. And don't take my word for it. Give it a try. Just spend one day where every 90 minutes you get up and you take a walk for 3 minutes. And when you come back and you sit down, I guarantee you will find you will be more productive, more focused, and more energetic. Now, after that, after you've met that goal of not sitting for more than 60 to 90 minutes without moving for 3 to 5 minutes, then try to move up to 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. So here, anything that's at a moderate threshold where you increase your heart rate, you increase your breathing rate, and maybe you're breaking a really light sweat, any of that counts. It doesn't matter to the duration. So, I mean, you could add up 30 minutes a day of physical activity by moving for 6 5-minute bouts, for one 30-minute bout, for 31-minute bouts for that matter. Everything counts. And remember, as we talked about in the previous slide, going from nothing to something, or from a little to a little bit more, confers the biggest benefits. In fact, going from 0 minutes to 15 minutes has a more dramatic improvement on your health than going from 100 minutes to 150 minutes. All of the minutes are not created equal when you're talking about going from doing nothing to something. Now, when you get into exercise, then we can start to talk about, okay, what should you be doing? Well, these are the American College of Sport Medicine's recommendations. They're guidelines. And again, guidelines are just that. They're some general guardrails. They're not rigid rules, carved in a stone tablet. But if you're looking to do aerobic exercise, these are the parameters you would see for aerobic exercise. If you're looking to do resistance training or muscular fitness exercise, these are the parameters that you'd be looking at here. When we send this presentation out afterwards, I've put some sample programs in here just to help you out. I realize some people that are watching this aren't exactly AFS clients and might be looking for a starter point. Certainly, consult your physician before you do begin an exercise program, particularly if you're not exercising. But this just gives you an idea of how you can incorporate, a different kind of workout, into your routine that meets the guidelines. Now, I do want to make some clinical recommendations on how we treat depression and anxiety with exercise. Now, like any clinical condition, it's important to understand that everyone responds differently to exercise when a clinical condition is present. So if somebody has depression or anxiety, not only would I strongly encourage them to be working with a mental health provider, but I would also encourage them to work with an exercise physiologist, somebody who understands the clinical nature of the condition that they're dealing with. Now, I want to be very clear on language here, because I think it's important. I'm talking about exercise here, not physical activity. Everyone, unless you have some very, very, very severe medical issues, can be physically active. As long as you meet the criteria for just general movement, and you can look up the physical activity readiness questionnaire online to see if you meet that criteria, you can move and be physically active. Here I'm talking specifically about exercise. So now we've elevated physical activity to that higher intensity level with greater specificity. And the way we're going to think of this is, whatever the medical condition does, whatever the mental health condition does to you, we want exercise to do the opposite. So if somebody is depressed, so their system is down-regulated, we want exercise to up-regulate their system. So in this particular case, provided they're able to do it, we want them to exercise at a moderate to vigorous intensity. We want them to get their heart rate up. That's the preferred protocol for somebody who has depression. Now, saying that, there's a lot of factors that have to be taken into consideration. Somebody may need to be progressed up to this. If somebody is depressed, it can become very problematic to get them from that state of great apathy and lack of motivation to exercising this vigorously. So all the standard progression principles apply, and this is why it's important, I think, to have a qualified professional guiding you through this. But in general, we want exercise for depression to upregulate the system because the system is downregulated. And the reverse is true with anxiety. We want things that downregulate the system in this point. So for somebody who has anxiety, we'd want exercise that are more mind-body in nature. We certainly can do cardiovascular and aerobic exercise or strength and resistance training, but it should be monitored to make sure it doesn't cause heart rate to get up too high. I mean, bear in mind when somebody, progresses, towards an anxiety attack or a panic attack, that is an extreme increase in heart rate. And occasionally more intense forms of exercise on some level can mimic the physiological response of a panic attack. So we do want to be very cautious with higher intensity exercise for individuals that have anxiety. So the take-home message on exercise as a clinical complement of a treatment for depression and anxiety is depression downregulates the system, so we want exercise to upregulate the system. Anxiety upregulates the system, so we want exercise to downregulate the system. Again, I would highly encourage that be guided by the multidisciplinary work of a qualified mental health provider and a qualified exercise physiologist, but that's kind of the summary overall of the research. So take-home message here. Mental illness and languishing are highly prevalent in modern society. They are. And I think mental illness is getting talked about more and more, thankfully. A lot of people have came out and spoken more openly about it, so it's definitely been destigmatized. I don't think languishing is talked about enough. I think there are a lot of people that are just going through life, going through the motions, and that's unfortunate because they don't have to, and we truly do only have one life to live. Movement is mental health medicine. Like we talked about, it directly impacts critical parts of the brain that are responsible for improving mental health. And I would submit to you that while it is certainly not a comprehensive mental health treatment, exercise and movement is the most efficient medical treatment that exists. The Surgeon General, the CDC, the World Health Organization all recommend 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity every week to improve your health and your well-being, both physically and mentally. There's no other behavior that you can only engage in for 150 minutes per week that you could derive those kind of benefits from. If you only ate healthy for 150 minutes a week, if you only slept well for 150 minutes a week, if you only avoided substances for 150 minutes a week, you're not going to see a big health benefit. But moving for 150 minutes a week at a moderate to vigorous intensity confers substantial health benefits. All the health benefits we've talked about this in this presentation. So from an efficiency perspective, it is incredibly efficient. And, if you contrast, and not say that some people shouldn't be taking the psychotropic medications, but if you contrast exercise as a complementary treatment to a mental health issue compared to a pharmaceutical for that, the side effects of the pharmaceuticals are numerous, not the least of which is the cost and some of the other side effects. Exercise, the only side effect of exercise and moving for improving mental health is you get physical health benefits from it. I think it's important to change the paradigm around exercise. I think this is so important. And this is really what we talked about in this presentation, was this whole idea that you can work with, not against, your evolutionary biology by attaching value and meaning to the immediate benefits of exercise and focusing on that for your motivation in terms of how it improves your overall mental health and well-being instead of the physical health benefits. It's a nuanced reframe, but it is a reframe that can make a profound difference in your ability to persist in the performance of movement and exercise in light of all of the cacophony of instantly gratifying things that exist in our world. We need to move from sitting less first to moving more second to exercising third. Don't think exercise has to be your first step. Again, particularly when we're talking about treating a mental illness, I completely realize that there are many things going on in someone's life that's struggling with a mental illness, and their first thought is not going to be to go buy a gym membership and start, running on a treadmill or lifting weights. Meet yourself where you're at with this. Just start by getting up and moving every 60 to 90 minutes for 3 to 5 minutes. Once you've mastered that and become confident in that, then you could think about ways to move your body with exercise in a way that's meaningful, fun, and appropriate. But you don't have to start with that. Start with just sitting less and moving more. And then, as I always say, the biggest difference goes from doing nothing to something. So just flatten that curve for yourself, and you'll see a pretty profound difference. That's my contact information. If you did have a question you want to send me, you can feel free to do that. We're going to have some time for Q&A right now. We'll certainly be sending this PowerPoint and presentation out via email afterwards. You get a video, you get the PowerPoint. But we do have about 15 minutes left, which is always my goal in terms of making sure there's time for questions. So please feel free to ask any questions that you might have, if any. Or maybe some of you are inspired to want to go take a walk. I would understand that. Any questions? I wonder if somebody's feverishly typing away. Well, as you guys are thinking of any questions you might be wanting to ask, again, I really recommend you check out that Move Your Mental Health report from the BRIC Foundation. Absolutely amazing resource to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this. And I think they've done a tremendous job. Well, I'm not seeing any questions come through. And just so everyone's clear, if you want to ask a question, there's the Q&A feature that you can ask a question through. If there aren't any questions, I appreciate everybody joining us today for the webinar. Please be on the lookout for an email afterwards that's going to give you the slide deck as well as a recording of this. Please feel free to share that with your friends and your family. I think this is important information to get out there. And be on the lookout for our webinar next month. If you have suggestions for webinar topics, please feel free to email those to me. Again, my email can be accessed by going through that QR code. Certainly, we got a good question here from Carlos. How can an approach be made to healthcare professionals to collaborate together? Yes, Carlos, that's a great question. So I will tell you that a lot of the work I do outside of AFS is on the professionalization effort in the exercise profession. And this is basically, how do we integrate exercise professionals into healthcare? And I will tell you that work is underway, but it's also very challenging work. So I work with two organizations that are on the front lines of this. One organization is the Physical Activity Alliance. The PAA's It's Time to Move initiative has a goal of making physical activity assessment, prescription, and referral the standard of care in medicine. And I'm on the board of directors for the Physical Activity Alliance, and we're working with federal partners, HHS, we're working with CDC. We're also working with the healthcare systems to figure out how to make this very technical and challenging proposition become a reality. And so I would encourage you to go to the Physical Activity Alliance's website, which is paamovewithus.org, paamovewithus.org, and go to the page on the It's Time to Move initiative, where you can learn a little bit about what's going on. Starting in 2026, the physical activity vital sign will be required in all electronic health records. That means in order for you to be a certified electronic health record in this country, it will be mandatory that a vital sign to assess physical activity status exists. That is the first step in the referral process. Once you diagnose something's a problem by getting a standardized measure in EHR, then you're able to provide referral for it. So that is something that is currently underway. And then the other group that I work with is the Coalition for the Registry of Exercise Professionals, or CREP. Their website is usreps.org. And this is a registry of all of the highly qualified exercise professionals in the country. There's about 150,000 of them on that registry. So a lot of what we're trying to do is figure out how to link up these qualified exercise professionals in local communities with healthcare providers. And a lot of that is done through building the bridge in electronic health records, because that is the walled garden of healthcare. So all of that to say, there is great work that is underway on the policy and systems change level to make that a reality. However, policy and system change is slow and takes time. So for right now, if you or anyone you know is a healthcare provider, I would encourage them to go to the registry for looking at exercise professionals in their community. Again, that's usreps.org, and that will start to build the bridge. There's a lot of other efforts that are underway. Really, it's a little outside of the scope of this webinar for me to dive too deep. If you or any of the other people that are listening to this webinar have questions on how we are working towards embedding qualified exercise professionals into the healthcare continuum, please email me. I'm happy to direct you towards some resources. We're making very, very positive progress. But again, because it's policy change that's happening on the federal level largely that eventually will matriculate to the state level, it is a complicated proposition. All right. Any other questions before I wrap it up? All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining me on this webinar. Please be on the lookout for our webinars next month. And please get outside, take a walk, and enjoy the weather. Have a great day.